With opening day just over 2 weeks from today, my opening day roster prediction is in, and it's looking like two prominent young stud position player prospects are going to be left off the roster. Why? We'll explain next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015. I've been hosting this show for coming up on 5 years, anniversary coming up soon, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Check us out there. And please hit that thumbs up and subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And coming up on today's show, yes, we're going to make our first opening day roster prediction in a long time. Now that the dust has settled on the offseason for the most part, we're still sitting around waiting for Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery to sign, and these guys fit the Giants, but the further we go, the more unlikely it seems, and the further behind they would be, and they wouldn't even be joining the rotation until deeper into the season, and it gets to be a problem. And anyway, we'll get to that when we discuss the pitching. What I want to get into first is the position player mix and how it mostly appears set, except that there are a couple of players who appear to be primed to make it, who maybe weren't necessarily the front runners coming into camp. And there are a couple of, like I said, young stud position player prospects who appear to be on the outside looking in. And so let's just jump right into who are those players. So I am omitting Marco Luciano and Luis Matos from my opening day roster. And I thought that Farhan Zaidi, president of baseball operations, really interesting comments, or just like relevant comments when he was talking about the J.D. Davis debacle. Basically said, look, if we had a 28 or a 30-man roster, of course, we would have room for J.D. Davis. But you only get 26, and there are just only so many spots. You got 9 guys in your lineup, and then that leaves you with 4 guys on the bench, assuming a 13 pitcher, 13 position player roster composition. And so moving around the diamond, I think the shortstop position is the one that was probably the biggest kind of open competition in this camp. And so that is where I'm going with non-roster invitee Nick Ahmed over Marco Luciano. And it's strictly based on the fact that Luciano has struggled mightily in camp at the plate. And so it just doesn't really make sense. It'd be one thing if he tore up AA and AAA last season and he just appeared to be so ready that, a little bit of spring struggles maybe wouldn't sway you. But he struggled in AA before rebounding, admittedly. And then he just had a brief little period in AAA where he struggled as well. And when I say struggled, I'm looking at, the strikeout rates are very concerning for Marco. And when I say concerning, I mean concerning when you try to, translate to the major leagues. He has struck out 44% of the time in spring. He struck out 38% of the time in the major leagues last year, and he struck out 36% of the time in AAA. And so I am not by any means giving up on Marco Luciano. I'm just saying you've got a guy in Nick Ahmed who, he probably has an opt-out in his contract, meaning if he doesn't make the team, he can leave and sign somewhere else. Whereas with Marco Luciano, you just have the literal option. He has minor league options to send him down. And so you could just go with that. It depends on the health of Nick Ahmed, but from everything I've heard and read and all that, he's healthy. And then you can think about the defense of a Matt Chapman and a Nick Ahmed on the left side. Nick Ahmed, historically one of the better shortstop defenders in baseball. And, 3 years younger than Brandon Crawford. So anyway, it doesn't hurt to option Marco Luciano and let him get those reps in AAA. He's still just 22 years old. It's not like this guy's 26, 27, 22 years old. Let him go down there and get his feet underneath him and tear it up. And if Nick Ahmed is just a complete disaster at the plate or something, and Luciano's tearing it up in AAA, it's easy to make that move where you call up a Marco Luciano. Now, the other position player kind of snubbed for me, and this is more of a matter of there's just not enough room and less of a matter of I think he's going to struggle, is Luis Matos. And so there's not enough room in that, and this is where I know a lot of people are going to disagree, basically, but you look at the outfield composition, and you've got Jung Hoo Lee, obviously not going anywhere. You just signed him to a $113 million contract. He's going to be your center fielder. And then in left, you've got a $18 million commitment to Michael Conforto. Conforto with a substantial major league track record. I know it was not the best season for him last year, but nonetheless, you're not just going to cut ties with Conforto before the start of the season just to give Luis Matos an opening day roster spot. When, just like with Luciano, Luis Matos can be sent to the minor leagues. And so it's about protecting inventory here, because what happens if you cut or trade Michael Conforto and then you give that job to Luis Matos? What happens if Luis Matos struggles? All of a sudden, you don't have that depth that you have when you start Conforto, and then if Conforto struggles or gets hurt, you do have the option to go to Luis Matos. So you just thin yourself out ever so much. And I mean, look, Conforto has a very long and impressive major league track record. This guy in his career has a .353 on base percentage and a .457 slugging. Last year was a down year for him. If we want to go on spring stats, he's done very well in the spring. 400 average, 545 on base, strikeout rate of 13.6%, walk rate of 27%. So he's just been killing it in spring training. And so I'm not just cutting. I mean, you could possibly see a trade of Michael Conforto to clear a spot, but you could also see that in the season. If Luis Matos is killing it in AAA and Conforto, whatever, if you have a lot of confidence in Matos, you could see a trade to clear a spot, but there's no need to do it before the start of the season. And then this is probably where it's even more disagreement out there potentially, and that is Mike Yastrzemski and Austin Slater. For some reason, there is just this contingent of fans who are just very, very sick of Mike Yastrzemski and Austin Slater. But if we look at what has Mike Yastrzemski done, just let's focus a little bit. I mean, he has literally never in his major league career had a below league average offensive season. So you might look at the batting average and think he has, but then you're not factoring in the on base percentage and the slugging enough. And especially when we look at what has he done against right-handed pitching. In his major league career, he's hit .247, which is whatever, .337 on base, which is not whatever, that's above average, .484 slugging, and add it all up, it's about 22% above league average offensive production. And he plays a mean right field, and he's a good base runner. And so Yaz, while not a star, is a very useful major league player. And so it's the same deal. You're not just going to cut ties with a useful, even just call him average major league player, when you can set, you're going to need Matos. Injuries happen, underperformance happens. You're going to need him. You're going to use him. it's just about opening day. You're not just cutting them. Like, ask any baseball executive around the league, and nobody in their right mind would say, yeah, the Giants should just cut Mike Yastrzemski. And same goes with Austin Slater. I've said this a million times. It's just a fact. He's got like the best OPS of all time as a pinch hitter, minimum 100 pinch hit plate appearances. And in his major league career, like his numbers against left-handed pitching are up there among the best in the sport since he's been, like, really mostly since his swing change prior to the 2020 season. I mean, he's literally like fourth best among all players. He's got a 141 weighted runs created plus, which means 41% above league average offensive production when facing a lefty, 380 on base percentage, which is super high, 486 slugging for Slater in those situations. So these are useful, quality major league players. They're not superstars, but they belong. And so I'm having Conforto and Yaz and Slater on my team. I have Nick Ahmed on my team, but what about the rest of the squad? So we will get into that momentarily and talk about, yes, one young player is making it onto my team, and I'll explain why. We'll get into it all in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you in part by our good friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS, daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, which can be a real difficult and tall task. If you're just trying to have a little fun, you simply pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch those winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including, yes, you heard me right, California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks also now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this season. I just did it myself. And best of all, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today, use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. All right, here we go. We are going to continue running through my thoughts on what I think the opening day roster will be. I do believe this is pretty accurate so far. Like, those expecting, I don't know, is anyone really expecting them to just cut a Conforto or a Yastrzemski or a Slater? Let me know below. It's just not going to happen. When you've got guys with options, they use the options. And then when guys inevitably struggle or get hurt, it's such a long season. That will happen. That's when those guys get their opportunities. And we saw that last year. I mean, Matos jumped. So did Luciano. Like, especially Matos. I mean, he claimed like an everyday role last season due to injuries and stuff. And so he's even more on the cusp right now. But I just think there's not room on the opening day roster. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, we're going to get to a mailbag at some point in the next couple of days. I also want to do a crossover with a surprise guest from the NL West breaking down the start of the season in the next couple of days as well. So be on the lookout for that. I've got a zillion mailbag questions left over, so we'll be getting to those in addition to our crossover. So, continuing around the diamond, let me just say, like, the rest of the roster is pretty set, and that's a nice place to be. You look at the catcher position, this is interesting because Joey Bart does find himself on the outside looking in, and something's got to give, and time is running out. Like, we're 2 weeks away, 2 weeks and a day from the regular season opener for the Giants. And right now, I mean, obviously, I think I know Patrick Bailey is number one catcher for the Giants. He did bruise his throwing hand yesterday in the game, but thankfully x-rays were negative. He is going to miss a few games here, but the good news is x-rays were negative. That would be very bad to lose a Patrick Bailey, but that's why there was a mailbag question, speaking of mailbags, where the question was, why haven't they traded Joey Bart? And one of my answers was, what if a catcher gets hurt? Like you just kind of want to wait as long as you can and see if you're healthy going into opening day. Because if you were to lose Bailey, then you would suddenly want Bart on your opening day roster. And the thing about Bart is he has to be on the opening day roster because he's out of minor league options. And because he's out of minor league options, and because Bailey's catcher number 1 and Tom Murphy is catcher number 2, they signed this guy Murphy, who hits lefties really well, is a good clubhouse presence and a good leader of pitchers, to a 2-year guaranteed contract with a 3rd-year club option. And so clearly not a guy they're just going to cut, right? So Bailey and Murphy are just obviously catchers number 1 and number 2. And so that does leave Bart on the outside looking in. And so assuming Bailey and Murphy are healthy, those are going to be your catchers, and Bart will have to be similar situation to JD Davis, perhaps, where they try to trade him. If they can't trade him, they put him on waivers. They'd have to designate him for assignment is basically what would have to happen. But hopefully they could find a trade partner for a catcher who was recently a top prospect making the league minimum salary. There should be some team out there willing to give up something for that, I would hope. And moving right along, I do just want to mention, actually, Blake Sable becomes that 3rd catcher. And he, because of the Rule 5 thing being over with, that was last year, they kept him all year. Because they kept him all year in the major leagues, he's now their quote-unquote property. And he has a full complement of minor league options. And so now he becomes that guy you can send to AAA. And if a catcher gets hurt, then he's the guy you go to. The thing is, right now, he's also banged up. I think it's a groin injury, but he becomes he's not at all like Joey Bart, but he becomes that depth at the catcher position in the minor leagues. So moving right along at first base, I think this is where it was pretty clear to me why JD Davis, and if you want my full breakdown on that JD Davis debacle crazy situation, check out the latest episode from Monday. But Wilmer Flores and LaMonte Wade Jr. were just more likely to play than JD Davis. They were ahead of him on the depth chart. And so those two form a platoon at the catcher or at the first base position, with Wade historically just hitting right-handed pitching really well. Flores hitting both lefties and righties. So I see him projected as a starter against all lefties. But also, again, injuries happen. Say LaMonte Wade gets hurt, then Flores can be an everyday first baseman. He showed last year he's very capable of being an everyday player. Say Jorge Soler gets hurt, as we get to the DH spot, Wilmer Flores capable of being an everyday DH. So Flores serves to start the year on a healthy squad as platoon at first base, but also pinch hitter extraordinaire, and you can pinch hit for whoever with him. And so he's going to play. That's the point, is he's going to get his at-bats. You're not just relegating him to this very narrow role where he's only facing lefties. At the end of the day, I expect him to have a ton of at-bats. So then moving to second base, here's your first kind of, besides, I guess, catcher, but catchers, even everyday catchers or main catchers need a lot of time off. Thairo Estrada is an everyday player at the second base position, and no surprise there. He's very much earned it. Solid player. Apparently, Bob Melvin has challenged him that this is the year where he can be an all-star. So let's see. I think that he definitely has that potential in him. If he has one thing to work on, it's he does chase out of the zone a little bit too much, and that has trended up in recent years. But clearly a solid major league player, in my opinion. So we already talked about Nick Ahmed at short. We will get into backup shortstop, which is crucial because right now, if you don't add this young player we're going to talk about, it's Wilmer Flores, or I guess it's Thairo Estrada. But even then, like, Estrada hasn't looked great when he's had to fill in at shortstop, so I don't love that. But third base, another everyday player. Yay, everyday players. Matt Chapman is your everyday third baseman. There's just no question about it. And getting into the outfield, we already discussed Conforto, Lee, Yastrzesmki, Slater. And then, so that's kind of only 4 outfielders. So then there's one player who rounds out that 13 player, position player mix. And I think it's going to be Tyler Fitzgerald. And I don't think I'm going out on too much of a limb here. Farhan Zaidi literally mentioned Fitzgerald when talking about the final roster spot and how they think it needs to be somebody who can play infield and outfield. And that is Fitzgerald. He's played third, short, second, center field. He can pretty much play anywhere, and he has a lot of speed. And he's, I thought he showed pretty well for himself when he debuted as a major leaguer last season. He did hit at about a league average rate and hit 20 homers and stole 29 bases in the minors last year. Was only caught 3 times on with 29 steals, and that was just in AAA. So actually between AA and AAA, he hit 22 homers and stole 32 bases. And so I think Tyler Fitzgerald definitely has a chance to be like a super utility guy for the Giants. The arm doesn't totally play at shortstop. It's a little bit not that strong. So, but you do have a little bit of coverage there with Estrada capable of playing. But if Nick Ahmed makes this team and needs off days, would it be Fitzgerald? It probably would be. Or you could go with Thairo and put Fitzgerald at second or Wilmer at second. So a lot of flexibility there, but I would just expect probably Fitzgerald to be the guy who fills in there at short. So that's my 13 player position player mix. And coming up next, the pitchers. And this is the great unknown. This is where it is so much less clear. And when you start looking at the bullpen, I mean, even the rotation, but especially now the bullpen, who's going to be after there's like 5 guys for sure, and then a bunch of question marks. So we'll try to answer those questions momentarily and before we do. Today's episode is brought to you in part by GameTime. Buying tickets to your favorite event. Maybe you're going to San Diego or LA for the Giants opening series road trip of the season. It's supposed to be fun, right? To go to these events. Well, why does the ticket buying experience have to be so stressful? It always has been for me in the past. Enter GameTime, where you actually get these perks that you don't get elsewhere necessarily, or I haven't, at least in my experience, where you can get images of seat views. This is huge. If you're going to a stadium that you've never been to before, if you're looking at different decks, right? Different levels, how do you know what kind of angle it's like from up there? I don't. But with GameTime, you get images of seat views, which is a total game changer for me. And another thing is, when do you buy the tickets? And how do you know if you're getting the best price? You don't, and it's just a gamble. But with GameTime, you're always getting the best price, because if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime will simply credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, as promised, we're going to try to figure out the pitching on the San Francisco Giants, because, the closer we get here, now that we are just over 2 weeks away from literally regular season baseball for the Giants, It's harder and harder for me to imagine that you're going to see a Blake Snell or a Jordan Montgomery signing. And while disappointing, like I've said all along, they claim to really, really believe in their young pitching. And Farhan Zaidi said months ago that he has never been in an organization, including his time with the A's and with the Dodgers, that has had this good of a pipeline of young pitching. And so if he really believes that, and they as an organization really believe these guys are that good, and we've seen some of it in spring training, talking about Mason Black, talking about Landon Roop, like we've seen some impressive young pitching. Hayden Birdsong, we know Carson Wisenhunt, there are a lot of dudes, and Kyle Harrison, obviously. And so we're going to attempt to break it down. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, by the way. Also, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 4 p.m. Pacific for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 4 p.m. Pacific time, be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 4 p.m. Pacific on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Special appearance from yours truly, of course. I am part of that show. So let's try to break down this pitching staff, though. So we know one thing for sure. Well, we know a few things for sure. We know the top of the rotation, Logan Webb, and we know basically 5 relievers kind of set in stone. But outside of that, well, there are some others. Kyle Harrison, Jordan Hicks, I think we know about them too. But what is that? 8 guys out of 13. And so that leaves 5 spots that are not entirely clear. So Logan Webb, yes, I know, barring any kind of injury or any freak incident of some kind, Logan Webb is obviously your opening day starter. Now, if you had signed a Blake Snell or a Jordan Montgomery, perhaps even, there's your number 2 starter. But even if they signed Blake Snell today, I don't think he would be ready to go to start the season. And so you're looking at number 2 starter Kyle Harrison, I think. And I start to squirm a little bit simply because he's unproven, and that's a lot of pressure to put on a young kid, although he is, by all reports, embracing that, and he wants to be that number 2 starter. So more power to him. But that's what it looks like to me, kind of breaking up the righties here, because number 3 in the rotation, I'm penciling in Jordan Hicks, who has looked mighty impressive this spring. I mean, there was a televised game where he started the other day, and he just was throwing an unhittable slider and commanding it. And that's the thing with Hicks, is command. He also throws upper 90s, and he's working on a splitter as well that he used to throw when he kind of was a starter before they converted him to a reliever to rush him to the major leagues when he started throwing 100 with the Cardinals organization. So that's how he became a reliever, but he always wanted to be a starter. So there's your first 3. And outside of that, we start to go, I'm not entirely sure who's going to pitch that 4th game or that 5th game for the Giants. So Keaton Winn and Tristan Beck were kind of the presumed 4 and 5 coming into camp. But Keaton Winn had a little bit of an elbow flare-up, and Tristan Beck ended up with an upper arm aneurysm that required surgery, which was thankfully successful, but he's not going to throw for 2 months or 8 weeks after the procedure, so he's out for a while. So Keaton Winn, though, evidently is still on track to be ready by opening day, and so I'm going Keaton Winn number 4, and that's assuming he's ready to go on opening day. But anytime you're talking about elbow tightness or whatever it was exactly with the elbow, there's always a chance for a setback. And then this is why I'm like, well, you could use some extra depth here in this rotation. And the number 5 starter, I think, is going to have to be someone who's not on the 40-man roster because Sean Jelly is dealing with an elbow thing, and they've optioned certain guys already who were possibilities, like Kaiwei Tang, and he's behind. He has like an oblique thing. And so I think it's going to be Mason Black. He's pitched a lot this spring, and he's been mighty impressive to me. It's kind of a unique arm slot and just a good quality mix of pitches, and a guy who's not on the 40-man, but I think cracks that opening day rotation. So again, they're putting a lot of faith in a totally unproven rotation outside of Webb, if this is in fact the starting 5 in that rotation, but I don't see really any other option unless they are to sign somebody else. And so based on the information we have, that's what I'm going with. And then in the bullpen, similarly, you have some sure things at the back end with Camilo Doval, the Rogers twins, Luke Jackson, and Ryan Walker. Ryan Walker, in case you missed it last year, had a phenomenal rookie season, and so he just immediately becomes part of that mix. So that's 5 guys out of an 8-man bullpen. And so who are the remaining 3? Well, I think you probably want another lefty in there, right? And Ethan Small is on the 40-man roster after he was acquired in a trade with the Brewers. I've seen him pitch a few times this spring, or maybe just once this spring, and funky kind of lefty arm angle, and has put up good numbers, pitched 3 2/3 innings in 2 outings. But, I think that he, because he's on the 40-man, projects to be that likely second lefty in the bullpen. And then outside of that, if you're looking at like roster resource, they've got Spencer Howard, not on the 40-man, Dalton Jeffries, not on the 40-man, as the other guys in this projected bullpen. And I'm not really going to argue with that. I think that Spencer Howard and Dalton Jeffries could be those final guys in the bullpen. And they're both guys who are capable of, being more than just 1-inning pitchers. They have starting experience. I mean, Dalton Jeffries was a starter in his most recent stint in the major leagues in 2022 with Oakland, and has mostly been a starter in his career. And the other guy to keep an eye on is Landon Roop. And so I need to double check how far Landon Roop has progressed in the minors. So he made 10 starts in Double-A in 2023, and that was it. So there must have been an injury. I'm not fully up to date on what happened there, but he only pitched 31 innings last year, but he's been mighty impressive. Just a really, really good curveball. And so I would throw him into the mix for that final bullpen spot as well, or they, send him to AAA and build him up as a starter, and he becomes an option if somebody in that rotation gets hurt or is ineffective, which is definitely possible. And they've got to protect these guys, and a lot of them will probably be on innings limits. So the pitching is what scares me. By the way, I think I forgot to mention DH. That's full-time Jorge Soler. Boom. Okay, so there's my roster prediction, my opening day roster prediction. Let me know if you had any differences in the comments section below. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, so thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I cannot wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.